All
Good
right,
evening,
Mark,
Dave.
let's go ahead and fire this thing off. How you doing?
Yeah, we are good. We are good. We are good. So, Dave, what are you going to teach me today? I'm
Yeah,
looking
so
forward
we've
to
been,
this.
yeah, exactly. We've been talking a lot about event-driven architectures and utilizing standards and how do we integrate our different systems using this event-driven architecture where we're using different tools instead of the very common approach of a data ops tool and an MQTT broker, that when you start getting into transactional data, that you need to use different systems. And so there was an article that I wrote up here about 2, 3 weeks ago of as of time of recording about how I go about doing it. This is now the in-depth video of what that looks like.
Okay. And let's back up first a minute for
Sure.
the folks at home. When you say transactional data,
Mhm.
what what do you mean? What is transactional data, and why can't I use the same approach?
Yeah, so when you have transaction, it's you have system A that needs to get information into system B is I guess the best way to approach it. And when you want to do that, you also want to ensure that that message got there. There's some patterns that you're looking for to where if I'm just using the standard, say, MQTT broker in this case, that message may not get there. And there's no mechanism for you to know that that didn't occur. And now you're into this conundrum of what do I do? Do I send that message again? Because now it might think, oh, well, here's the second message and process it, or it doesn't get there the second time. So when you want to do transactions, it's I'm communicating from system A, it needs to go to system B. I need to ensure that that message that I'm sending it is properly formed, and I need to ensure that it has all the details and data that is required by that consuming system. And then finally, I need to know if there was a problem, what was that problem, so that system A can now decide what do I want to do next. That's what I mean by transactional data versus what I'll often call what we'll talk about is telemetry data, which is basically it's your time series data. It's your SCADA data. It's the data that I now have a measurement. I have a set point that it's out of my production environment. And I just want to know what was that value over some period of time. That is all telemetry. And something like MQTT is perfect for it. Why? Because if all of a sudden it misses a read or it doesn't get a message, that's not a big deal. I mean, certainly you don't want to trivialize data loss, but that's really what we're interested in is transactions. It's I call it it's the FedEx of absolutely positively overnight versus telemetry data. And I don't mean to pick on the US postal system, but USPS is you mail a letter and it's chances are it's going to get there, but every now and again something doesn't happen. And what do you do? So the tools that we're going to use today, and we'll get into sharing my screen here is a minute, is that I'm using Odoo to demonstrate my ERP. Now, I don't actually have an Odoo instance set up. I have used it before, but I'm just going to use a payload that would likely come from an ERP or what would it might look like coming from Odoo in this case. And that's again outside the scope, but now I'm going to handle that message process forward. And I want to get it to the consuming system is now going to be Sepasoft for the NES. In the middle, I'm going to use something called BPMN. So bpmn.io. It is a Node.js implementation of a tool called Camunda. So I have built a complete engine to not only model it, but to actually execute all of the logic that's there, as well as an event broker from Solace. So it's Odoo, it's Camunda, or my version of Camunda using its open source tools, Solace, and then finally Sepasoft is going to be the ERP, or excuse me, the MES itself. So
And you
let's get
mentioned
into it.
you
Oh, go ahead.
mentioned BPMN. Can you just
Yes.
tell me what's BPMN and why am I using it?
Oh, fantastic question. I love it when I use TLAs and FLAs and I don't explain it. So BPMN is business process model and notation. It's one of the standards that we use for documenting the exchange of information between systems. And that's what's generically known as workflow. We utilize BPMN. That could be the process of going from I have a manufacturing order that I now need to ship. So that's that order to cash. That's one workflow that you might be interested in. It might be I have a manufacturing order that I need to produce on a line. That'd be a second workflow. And then finally, in this case, it's a data workflow of I now have information coming from system A or Odoo in this case that I need to get to system B, which is Sepasoft in this case, and ensure that that transaction happened both from the underlying technology piece, the AMQP messaging protocol is what we're using, and then of course the acknowledgement to this the other system itself that, yeah, not only did the message get through, but the data was properly processed and I got it back. So we'll use BPMN business process model and notation for that. And you'll see it when we get into the demo.
Okay.
Cool.
Let's get showing.
All righty. So whenever you start sharing your screen, the first question you have to ask is, can you see my screen?
Big thumbs up. There it is.
Big thumbs up. Awesome. So what I'm talking about is the traditional way, or what I'm showing here is the traditional way of getting information from your ERP. This is your SAP. This is your Oracle. It's Microsoft Dynamics. It's any one of these enterprise resource planning tools, and I need to go execute that work. So I want to do an integration into what's now known as the manufacturing execution system. That's the MES. And the traditional approach of doing it is through a flat file exchange. It could be done through, if there's any kind of message handlers. I might have another database that my MES is hitting, but it's what I'm getting at is this is a very bespoke way of getting data from system A to system B. It's coupled. It uses bespoke models. You're literally just System A is connected to System B. It's hardwired in there, and that's the traditional approach.
Yeah.
Once I get my mouse going and it starts scrolling up, then you'll see this is the approach that we're going to take, where I now want to decouple this, and I want to put it through an event-driven architecture. So I'm going to have some mechanism that is now from my ERP. Either ERP sends a message using AMQP and it's native, or more likely, I'm going to have to use some tool in an API that is going to get the message. Outside of scope of what we're looking at, we're just modeling this as we've assumed that the message has arrived and we know what that format is. And now between my business process model notation tool, again, Camunda, and my Solace, which is my event broker, I'm going to perform the orchestration of getting that information from ERP to MES. And in this particular design, I'm also going to use an API call to go to my MES. And that was a design choice that I made. The advantage that this does is it decouples it. If for some reason my MES is not online, or there's any number of reasons why this could happen, my ERP is going to send a message. Solace is going to keep it in its queue using this business process model notation. And when the MES comes back online, now it's going to guarantee that message is there and the workflow will continue on. So that's what we're going to look at, what I'm going to show you. The reason why we have this approach is we're going to pull out, of course, our favorite standard, ISA 95. And this is, right? Everybody has it. I know we all sleep with one next to us on our nightstand. So this is actually from part 6 of the ISA 95 standard. And this is just giving you an image or a visualization of what actually occurs in this information exchange through a standardized format. So you'll have information that's sitting in a database, and this is an application A here in this case is going to be Odoo. And there's going to be some mechanism that now I have a manufacturing order that has been created, and I need to get that to system B so system B knows that it can process it. So there's going to be some mechanism where I'm going to collect information, and that could be an internal script that is running within Odoo. And then now I need to convert that to a global format. So in this case, I have this collect information that's just being handled in some way that is, we don't know how it got done. We just know that it got done. We're going to orchestrate this information using BPMN. We're now going to convert it to this global format. So when we start talking about parts 2, 4, and 5, this is parts 2, parts 4. Those are your information models. And then part 5 now gives you the noun and the verbs for doing that process. So we're going to convert this into a standard JSON schema that is known as B2MML. And then finally, we're going to use part 6 of the standard to actually send that to a messaging application. And our messaging application in this case, of course, is going to be that Solace. And we've now bound that event to where any message that shows up on a particular topic, it is now going to process that information. So part 6, it's a way to decouple these and put it in an event-driven architecture. And then through the same workflow, we're also going to, again, use Solace to receive that publication on that message. It's now going to get it converted back from the global format. We're now going to move it into its local format. So for Sepasoft to have that, or to be able to process information, it needs to be in the Sepasoft way that it can now execute some of its functions and get that information in. So for this particular case, what I've decided to do is that API. So going back up to this message up here, again, I'm going to make an API call between this middle layer here, that is my BPMN Solace, and make an API call down to MES. And then Sepasoft is now going to handle all of this converting to the local format and handle that. It was just a design decision. So
can I ask
go
you?
ahead. Yeah, sure can.
So if we look up above, I mean, we started with our ERP to, closely coupled to the MES, and then we've gone to the event-driven format where we now have something in the middle that allows us to decouple. But when we come back down to the next drawing down, if application A is our ERP, application B is the MES, and it's this little bit in the middle, the messaging application. We're doing a lot of heavy lifting, it sounds like, in there.
Yeah, and that messaging application is, if I were to draw a box around this, this is actually occurring, in this BPMN layer is probably covering this information between all, these systems here. So hang on, I'm having a hard time doing a multi-select because what I don't want to do is start dragging things around. But this converting to global messaging application, really once we're done with that collecting of information and processing information, this middle box from this convert to global format here to this convert to local format, that's really all being handled by this middle piece here as well. So it's this application A to application B is not meant to illustrate what we're actually doing, but it's more of this is the approach or why we're coupling it this way, because it's more than just getting information and putting it to a topic. There's a few more pieces that need to be part of this actual exchange of information, which once we get into the BPMN itself, I think it'll start to make a lot more sense. Cool.
Yeah, we might come back to this at the end, and when we have our story, it'll make a lot more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at here is now we're into, I'm using the open source bpmn.io, but you could be using the commercial version of this called Camunda for doing your business process model notation. This is a workflow tool or a BPMN tool. And going back to that other diagram, this is that middle piece of what all are we doing here. So as I mentioned earlier, we're receiving a payload from Odoo outside of scope of how it got here, but all we know is that there's a new manufacturing order in Odoo, and it published on it presented itself to a channel that is now being subscribed to by that middle piece, that BPMN Camunda piece, Solace piece that is in the middle. So when we get into the event-driven architectures, and I've talked before about we need to do data validation, we need to do schema validation, we need to do error handling. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Is I now have this message that is shown up, and I'm going to use just a Solace. It's called the try me to just publish that information. Well, the first thing I need to do is make sure, does this schema, is it what it should be? Is the data in the right format? Are all the fields that I need, are all of them there? So if you look over here on the right side, you can see what is my schema source. For this particular demo, I actually built that schema into the back end of the tool itself because I know what the data contract, I know what that data structure is going to look like. While I could do it inline as I utilize this tool, I kept it hard-coded in the back end because there's some efficiency gains that you get for doing that. Plus, if somebody else comes in and starts making some modifications for this, I don't need to be concerned that they now have dorked up that inline schema. So there's some benefits for doing it. But clear takeaway here is that I want to validate that schema before I do anything with it. So now we'll have a decision of was this payload valid or not valid? And if it wasn't valid, then, well, I'm just going to go into the invalid payload. It's going to go into the dead letter queue, and then all will be done, and the whole thing or the whole process stops. But if that schema is good, I'm going to run it through now a JSON auto transform. So what the JSON auto transform is going to do is going back to that one diagram that we saw earlier, I now want to get this into a common topic or a common structure for a payload so that any other system that understands how to work with B2MML can consume that. So we want to put this into a standardized format that any system can consume, and we have an agreed upon mechanism or structure to what that message looks like. So I get the message of a new work order, manufacturing order in Odoo. I validated the schema. I now get it transformed, and now I'm going to run it across that exchange. So now I've come down that application A, and I'm going to be now actually doing that message itself. So I'm going to take that JSON transform, and I'm now going to publish it to AMQP. So this target address, this now comes from part 6 of the ISA 95 standard, where I now want to have a common messaging model. And in this case, I'm going to have my source system. I'm going to version it. So that's V1. I have my enterprise site is going to be my hierarchy scope, because in this instance, my ERP is communicating at the site level itself. And now I want to take this operation schedule. That is the part 5 model. That's the noun that I want to publish. And I want to give it the verb action. What am I actually doing with this payload? Well, I'm going to process it, because this is in a push message where I now want to use process acknowledge. And we've talked about V2MML in the past, and the ISA 95 parts 5 and 6. And there's some verbs that are associated with push, pull, and pub sub. Because my data contract is written around this AMQP concept, and the reason why I'm using AMQP is that because it's an event broker, it's going to ensure delivery. It's the FedEx message delivery system in using my analogy. But there may be other systems that are interested in getting this information or being notified that there was an event that occurred. So I'm also going to send it out over MQTT. So some concept that we talk about sometimes, it's not the tyranny of or, it's the power of and, channeling my inner good to great. I also want to make sure that this message is available to any other systems that might be interested in that event happening. And then I'm finally going to end the publication. So what we've seen here in this first BPMN flow, as I've documented, is that, whoa, my mouse is super sensitive today. I get the message from Odoo, validate the schema, I transform it, I send it out over AMQ so I can enforce the data contract, and then I let other people know that this event occurred. There's a new manufacturing order within Odoo, and they can do with it whatever they want, but it doesn't interfere with any of the message getting back and forth. So this is workflow 1 that's been created.
Okay, so let me ask a few questions. So
sure.
This is workflow 1. This is the workflow that's happening. I'm trying to map it to the drawing you had earlier, where we had our BPMN.
This is kind of that part A. I've sent it out to the message.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm kind of here at this point.
You're here at this point. But if we come back up to the architecture where you had a tiny bit, I suppose, is it happening? Is Solace doing this? Is it the ERP? Is this BPMN? Where's this happening? I suppose
this is all here in the BPMN. So what you're seeing here is a pure modeling process. Now, the way that BPMN tools work is that there's all of these. There's an engine on the background that takes this drawing and then transforms to what am I actually doing at this particular step, and that's what's occurring here.
Our BPMN engine is subscribed to Solace, and it got Solace received a message from the ERP.
In this case, we don't know how it got there. We're just it got there. Yeah, it was magic. Yeah, and when I demonstrated, and when I demonstrated, I'm just going to like when you're using other tools, I'm just going to create a payload and publish to the topic that Solace is actually subscribed to, and that'll actually trigger this workflow.
Yeah, and then we're making sure that it's valid. So we have a record of what a valid schema should look like. Once it's valid, we're transforming it from Odoo's bespoke schema into an industry standard B2MML schema, so that any systems that want to use it downstream, we're using a recognized standard. And if in a few years Odoo gets removed and we end up putting in Microsoft Dynamics or SAP, we just have to do a remapping. Our downstream systems aren't affected.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't point out it's coming in on a bespoke topic as well. So it's a bespoke model, bespoke topic. We need to get it transformed to that common infrastructure. Remember, we want to integrate our intelligence into technology, not into system solutions and infrastructure, right? So that's what we're doing here. So now that I've got this converted, did you have other questions there, Mark?
No, I was going to say, just so often companies that are doing an MES and they're starting to talk about implementing a manufacturing execution system and other, MOM domains, they're also looking at upgrading an ERP, and they're having that ERP upgrade discussion. And I couldn't count them on all my fingers, the amount of times I've been on projects where they've asked that question. Okay, but what if we change our ERP in 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think we'll finally make that point when we get to the end of this and you can see what actually gets created here. So now I want to go to workflow 2. And we need to load it. And now you can see, so going back to my diagram here real fast, what we're now looking at is I've now published on my messaging application, and now I need to process this information and get it into application B. So that's what's happening here in workflow 2, is that I've now received this process operation schedule. So this is that B2ML model that I received on the channel that I am listening for. But just like the other side, the first thing I'm going to do is validate that B2ML schema. Why? Because when we start getting into event-driven architectures and exchanging information, well, as it turns out, sometimes computers make mistakes. Something happens. So we need to verify before we start processing this information that we have everything that received the way that we should. I mean, it even could have been in that previous step that that the BPMN did not properly form that B2ML or something went wonky.
Yeah.
So we just need to verify that it's there. If it's not valid, it runs to the dead letter queue. Otherwise, then we're going to make a post into our MES itself, and that's Sepasoft in this case.
When you say valid, are you that you sent me an order, but you didn't give an order number? So there's data missing that I've expected, or are we looking at you've said make this on this machine? That machine can't do that.
It's the former. It's the former. Yeah. Now, could we put that business logic in this particular process? Yep, we absolutely sure could. There's no reason that says you can't do it. So even this post down to Sepasoft, this could have been handled in multiple ways. For this particular application, I'm just going to take this payload. If it's valid, I'm going to call the REST API into Sepasoft using the Ignition web dev, and Sepasoft is now going to process it, handle all the business logic that's associated with it. We'll actually see that here.
Okay. Yeah.
So great questions. So next thing is, now, was I successful or was I not successful? So on this API call, I'm going to get a response, and that response is going to tell me what happened. If I follow the happy path, then I'm now going to build and acknowledge. So going back to that, if you remember the process operation schedule or operation schedule process, well, now I want to send a message back just acknowledging that I got it. So again, utilizing the standard ISA 95 parts 5 and 6, I now have a model that I can build. I have a channel that I am going to exchange that information on so that Odoo is aware of this actually occurred. So this is going to be the happy path. I build it, I publish it back out to operation schedule acknowledge. In the same fashion, I want other systems to know that Sepasoft received this message. So if you're doing any kind of error processing from some other system, you now know that it happened. And of course, I'll end it in this particular workflow and it's been accepted. But let's say there's something wrong with the message. Maybe there is a material definition, or what's sometimes known as a product code, that wasn't there, or the quantity was empty, or the quantity was using it came in as a float instead of a string value. If there's any reason of something could go bad, well, now we're going to give you that information, and it's also going to respond. It says, look, on this acknowledgement, there was a failure, as well as on MQTT, there was that same failure that you ran into as well. And then finally, that workflow is going to end. That's what happens here. So this is that second piece of going back to our diagram. I've now completed this full step, and now I need to start the process of sending the information back. So instead of application A being Odoo and application B being Sepasoft, we're now going to flip it up, and it's going to follow the exact same process once we get to the third step here. So any questions so far?
Not so much question, just a comment. I suppose by having these workflows, and if we think of them as a design pattern, as our friends in IT might like to call them, if you're building a system, if we're part of the same organization and you're in a plant building a system that has Odoo and Ignition, and I have a plant that's SAP and Julep, the same structure holds We probably we don't even need to have Solace. You know, these are workflows that are tool independent.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I'm just utilizing, I chose to use Camunda, but there's Flowable is another tool that does the exact same thing. The point is I can model this using BPMN. It is a global recognized mechanism for modeling business processes, as the name would suggest. I can use different mechanisms of exchange. So looking here at this messaging application, I chose to use Solace, but it's using AMQP. I could use any system that supports AMQP. The reason why it's an event protocol that guarantees message delivery between systems. That's why it's chosen over MQTT. But I use Solace. At some point, you are going to have to buy technology, or excuse me, infrastructure
Yeah.
and systems and solutions. But the idea is going back to that example of I can follow this exact same workflow pattern, and all I need to do is exchange out what is the actual endpoint of what broker am I calling in both cases, because I now have my B2MML. That's the point. I've abstracted it away. I now give the ability to truly integrate your intelligence into infrastructure. Workflow 3. So now the last piece is that we've now flipped what application A is now Sepasoft. I need to get it back into Odoo. So all I'm really doing is just reversing that same process. I'm going to receive this acknowledge operation schedule. So within ISA 95 parts 5.6, I have the process is the sending system. The acknowledges, hey, I have it and everything's good or everything's not good. I'm going to validate that B2MML acknowledge schema, same type of action that occurs, valid and not valid. Now I'm going to turn it back to that bespoke ER payload. I'm going to publish it to the ERP. And then finally, I'm going to notify via MQTT anybody that is interested in getting the message of what actually happened. So I now have any other system that is interested in the exchange of information between a new manufacturing order, getting into my MES, into Sepasoft in this case. They now have that complete route, and whatever their business logic looks like, or whatever it's doing, they have access to it as well. So that's what part 3 looks like.
So so what we're saying there, when we publish to the ERP, that's I suppose what is again on our U diagram as I'm thinking of it.
Mhm.
The last part is an extra, perhaps the notify via MQTT, and that's allowing any other system, if we had some business intelligence systems or we wanted to do some machine learning and we wanted to send it to a data lake, that allows us do that without having to do another bespoke integration.
Yeah, exactly. So if you remember the old party lines, and I'm going way back, this is old school, where you might have 10 people that all shared a telephone line. And you and I might be having a conversation. That's going to be more this AMQP piece of it's dynamic, but you have other people, sometimes they just pick up the phone and listen in. That happened
Yeah.
quite a bit. That's more the MQTT piece. So it's kind of the party line, but what we want to do is enforce a data contract between two systems utilizing a proper technology, AMQP, versus I just want to send it out there. This becomes a very good lightweight messaging service that just, it's the party line. This
Yeah.
happened and everybody knows it, right? Cool. So I actually have my MQTT broker that's actually subscribed to my Solace broker. So something to keep in mind is Solace supports both AMQP as well as MQTT. And there's a couple other, I can actually do direct REST calls to it as well. It does support that, but I wanted to try to make this as event driven as I could. On that conversion between Odoo, so this right here is that topic that Odoo publishes on. This is a standard way of actually expressing that manufacturing order. So I've created just generically, this is my bespoke model. This is what it'll look like. And then this is what it's going to look like when I actually convert that over into a B2MML payload. So this is that process operation schedule. And I now have a schema that's taking, here's my ID of that manufacturing order, and I'm converting it into all the pieces that would be associated with that. And now I can get it into the proper format. So some people might want to know, what does this actually look like? In that transform process, that's really, I'm starting off with this message structure and I'm getting it converted over to this message structure. And that's what that looks like. And then let's see, I think there's one more piece that I wanted to show, and that's actually what's happening. So this is my MES work table. You can see that I don't have any kind of manufacturing order that's built in here. And then on that web dev endpoint, let's actually take a look at what that looks like. So something that I've done here is that not only have I've created a web point, but I want to make sure that that endpoint is also following that same generic or abstracted naming pattern. So I would really want to even make that API what it's going to hit called process operation schedule. Now, I did put Sepasoft in that URL only because I wanted to keep it organized in my system. But if I wanted to change this over, say, there's another really good MES that's built on Ignition. Say I decided, you know what, I don't want to use Sepasoft anymore. I want to use Kanoa. Well, now all I need to do is just start using Kanoa and then just rebuild in this logic. Now, in my validating my the data, I have that all being handled within my Sepasoft system or within Ignition itself. There is another option to, in this particular process, if I wanted to, I could actually have this BPMN make a call to Sepasoft of, do you have this particular material code? I could make a call to Sepasoft and, do you already have this manufacturing work order? And I could actually make multiple calls back and forth. For me, the efficiency was just send it the information and it can handle whatever is there. So again, it's just a design consideration, but now it's going to take this payload that came. So you can see me of just handling all of that data, getting it parsed properly. I have some error handling in here that if something went wrong. I'm now going to check material definition to ensure that it exists. So now I'm looking to see, do I actually have that particular, the product code or the material definition that's appropriate with it? Do I have a due date that is in the proper format? So I'll validate that. I'm going to validate the quantity to ensure that it's not 0, and then that quantity is properly in a proper format. And then once I've decided, yep, this is all good, I'm going to make the update to make the appropriate handles. And then, of course, if there's any kind of errors, that all comes back. But we're assuming that we build really good systems. So if once everything works well, I'm now going to use a common convention of 200. We're all happy, successful, and Bob's your uncle. So that's what that looks like. Let's get back over here in a vision so that people can actually see the magic happen. All right, and then of course I also have you can see the when that actually occurs and what happens. So now we're going to go up into Solace, and this is going to be that what everybody hates of, I'm now going to do something live and hope that it works. So within Solace, just a little bit of background, they have what's called message VPNs. This is a way that, there's a lot of capability into Solace. I highly encourage you to take a look at what they're doing, but we're just going to use their default message VPN. And you can see that I have queues in here that are handling this process operation schedule, process, and acknowledge. So those two queues exist here. And then I'm also listening on this particular channel as well. So that's what's happening.
Solace is queuing the data to make sure that it arrives where it's supposed to go. It's not just sending out messages and hoping.
It's correct. There's a message queue that it's going to go into its own system that until it gets acknowledgement that the system that's interested in it got it, it's going to keep it there, and it's going to continue to retry until it happens. So now we're going to publish to the topic. So I need to come back over to my generic manufacturing work order. So this is where some of this, there's a little bit of hand waving. It's a magic that occurs of, we don't really know how this message got there. We just know that it got there. So we're going to now,
in the real world,
go ahead.
In the real world, Odoo is publishing the message to that topic.
Yes, you would likely have and ideally you would actually have some of this logic to where Odoo is going to convert it to the proper structure, but sometimes that doesn't happen. It's dealer's choice. We have many ways of going about and affecting this. And I guess I should say when I did that transform, I skipped over a part. We're using something called JSONata to do that transformation itself. So that's another really great tool to use. But yeah, ideally coming from Odoo, it's just going to publish right to this channel, and it's going to give you its payload. So that there's it's design choices.
Yeah, because sometimes you can get into the nuts and bolts of the ERP and have it publish the data in the format you want it.
Mhm.
Often you can't.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
ERP does what the ERP wants, and you just get the data in the
Mhm.
format
Yeah.
they want to give it to
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And something that might have been happening here is maybe there's a workflow zero of I'm now polling Odoo to find out, do I have a new manufacturing work order? And when there was a new one, this bespoke payload, this is what I actually got back on that return message. So maybe I'm just making an API call to it, and now I'm just going to publish it over to this particular topic because that's how it got done. I didn't want to get into the weeds, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. So here's the moment of truth. We're going to publish. So what you're going to see in order is that you have this the faux work order that I just published out using the try me. You even have the sender ID of what actually occurred. I now can follow that process through through my AMQP to ensure that all of those messages occurred. So this is now me getting that JSONata or using the JSONata transform. I'm now publishing out over this topic ERP v1, utilizing that process operation schedule. I now have received the response back from Sepasoft that is now told me, yep, everything is good. I now have that payload. And then finally, I've converted it back to the payload that Odoo is expecting. And this could be that another workflow that we did look at that will take this information and it'll do an API call back to Odoo itself. So you can see here on my the work order that it's processing that work order and it updated it successfully. And coming back into my Sepasoft itself, I can now turn that on. You see now that I have that manufacturing work order, I now know when it needs to be delivered. And then taking a look at my MQTT message, you can see that all those messages got published through. So utilizing it, here's my enterprise site. That is my hierarchy scope. I have my process, my acknowledge response, and I'll know do. You're not going to see that initial message that came through from that try me because that happened outside of MQTT Explorer, but you can see that I got that response back and it's now utilizing the payload that it should have. And then of course, process and acknowledge it now handled all of that. So there you go, end to end. It's an event-driven architecture utilizing the open standards, mainly ISA 95. We have BPMN. We're also utilizing tools like Camunda, Solace, utilizing MQTT and AMQP. There's a lot that's going on here, but you know, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, man, that sure seems like an awful lot of work. This is so much easier,
That is the
right?
question I was about to ask you. I was then I say, Dave,
Yeah.
why not just we do an API, put it in.
Yeah, exactly. And Kevin Jones at Ectobox, he gets asked this a lot, or his example, if I need to go from my pinky to my thumb, why would I go all the way around my elbow? Sure seems like that. So, and we've sort of danced around that question a little bit earlier. But one of the architectural approaches that we are very familiar with is, man, and I apologize, my mouse is quite sensitive, is that I want to integrate all my systems through technology. And I've demonstrated that. And if I used an API, if I replace any one of the functionality in this particular system and there's integrations into my MES, I'm going to have to do all of them. Versus if I just change out, say, my MES, all I need to do is these scripts that I wrote over here within the web point, that web dev API, is that all I need to do on my consuming system is just recreate all of those data contracts that I have from all the other systems because I know what my API endpoint is. I know what my topic of exchange is. That's the reason why we want to do it, because it means that I'm a lot more flexible in the future. I now have a pure event-driven architecture where I've abstracted away all of the systems, solutions, and infrastructure.
Yeah, and in
That's
the
why you want to
discussion,
do it.
I think that we were having recently, you still hear 80% of digital transformations are failing,
Mhm.
and you hear about pilot purgatory. And when you're doing your pilot and you have two systems to talk to each other and you do a direct connection, great, everything works, it looks great. But as you scale, as you bring in more systems, when you have those point-to-point connections, you're introducing friction to the system. And the
Mhm.
more systems you add, the more and it gets to a point where you've gone from having friction to just being seized. and you can't back up. But so okay, you've convinced me. I don't want to have a point-to-point integration. I'm going to have something in the middle. But let's talk a little bit more, because I think it's a good point to talk about. We could have just published to a broker, be it MQTT or AMQP. We've added in another few steps. So maybe it's not going to your elbow, you're going, to your shoulder. And let's talk about those steps and why they're important and what they are going to give us longer term.
Yeah, so when we do the event-driven architecture, and I'm assuming you're talking about, wow, there's schema validation, there's data validation, there's error handling. It's all those steps of
transforming to BPMN. There's a bunch of steps there that we added.
And that transform means that to any other system, if I've abstracted not only all of my technology, I have a common payload that I can now, it's the maximum of anybody can solve a problem. That's the easy part. Can I scale and extend it? When I use these standard messaging payloads, if I decide you know what, I need some additional information in that particular payload. Let's say there's, I only right now have, say, material as part of that request. And now I need to start putting in, I need to name people, or I need to name some physical assets that are associated with that. If I build those in, I might break that schema validation of now there's going to be a key that shows up that, I don't know what to do with it. Because I've put it in a common JSON, JSON structure, the B2MML, if I add it and maintain that schema integrity, then it doesn't matter. That payload itself gives me the ability to scale and extend the particular solution, which is why. Because when you start getting into bespoke data models, that's where you really run into trouble. If now every system is going to look at a new payload coming and it's going to go, I don't know what all this is, and it might throw an error. You have no idea what your consuming systems did.
Okay. So let's go back to the U diagram. Let's have a I don't know if we can do this. Maybe we have the technology, but if we had the U diagram and the MQT Explorer, and we could see the messages that came in and where they go,
Sure.
that might help cement it.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back here, here's that U diagram. So we're going from system A to system B, and then of course back from system B to system A. If you look at the MQTT Explorer, what you see here is the process operations schedule. So this is the message that would be coming from Odoo over to Sepasoft, and Sepasoft is now parsing this particular information as it consumes it. So this process information, that's this application A, it's being published and converted into this global format, global name, and it's now being published over this operations schedule topic. So that's going to be this messaging application, but that's going to be part of the channel itself. So it's the format and it's the channel that is being defined by the standard.
But Odoo took that manufacturing order, and we don't have it in there. I think we only have the response.
Correct.
But if we can imagine in there the original payload, that's happening up there. That's a gathering of information. That's Odoo sending it over.
It would have shown up on this particular topic. So it's this manufacturing order that possibly could have been there. So it's manufacturing order, and it would have been just the message itself where you'd have seen.
Yeah. And then we converted it to that global format and published it, allowing system B to now get standardized data. So it knows what to do with it. It knows how to run with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what you're seeing now on the return trip is I'm now acknowledging it. So now Sepasoft has become application A, and Odoo has become application B. I have this common data structure. I have a common channel that I'm using, but I do need to get it back to Odoo in a way that it understands. So this is now going to be that response mechanism. So much like it had this bespoke channel for when it releases a manufacturing order, in this instance, it's going to have this bespoke channel for where I want to receive that process back. as well. So got too many screens open now, which is why you see it in this bespoke. But it does give you a little bit of information of what actually came through originally. So there's some details around those events. You can track it.
Yeah. I'm running out of questions.
Very good.
But I think it comes back to something that we keep talking about, and the importance of that data contract, the importance of knowing what people are going to put into payloads, what systems are going to publish in, so that other systems know what to expect. There's still a lot of people, I think, trying to build event-driven architectures, and they haven't agreed on data formats and payload structures. And when it's one person building it, it's great. When it's two, it gets a bit messy. When it's 200, it becomes a nightmare.
Exactly. And that's why we focus on standards-based manufacturing operations management built on a modern technology stack. That is our claim to fame. Cool.
Well done. Great. That was great.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Great questions. I thought you were going to throw me a couple of curveballs. I'm glad I was able to answer those. So enjoy the rest of your evening, Mark, and we'll be catching up soon.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thank you. Talk to you soon.